Well, back to another webcast. It's July 8th, 2015, and we're in the middle of a one-week introduction to the Venetian style class. So I thought we would look at a bunch of different molds that are associated with Venetian style glass blowing. I think we all know the dip mold or optic mold, but there are some others, and there's a very curious one that we'll see at the end. So we're going to look at different molds, and then after we look at these different molds, we're going to look at different ways of achieving the same thing. We're going to look at the varieties that face a glass blower when they pick up a blowpipe. And it starts with the glass blowing, and then there are all these molds that are possible. But first, let's consider that there are two big categories. There's free blowing and there's mold blowing. Below the heading mold blowing, there are a bunch of subcategories. But free blowing, let's look at a quick piece, take about 3 minutes, and we'll look at something that represents where it all started, Rome, 1st century AD, and we're going to look at a little Roman bottle, a long-necked bottle. I gather the glass, I marver, I blow the bubble, and to ensure that the tip stays the thickest part, I'm going to marver the tip a little bit, and I'm through with my setup. I'm going to put the punty in so that it's hot when I need it. I'm reheating. And again, to ensure that the tip is the thickest part, I'm going to marver it one more time. I blow the bubble a little bigger and elongate the bubble to become a tube. Now the tube cools quickly, the thick mass of glass on the end stays hot. And if I blow again, the thick glass inflates. I'll make a constriction so that I can get this off the blowpipe. I'll flatten the bottom, and now I have to hold it from the bottom so that I can finish the edge, and I'll hold it with a punty or pontil. This isn't Venetian, but it really clearly shows how much you can do in glass blowing with just timing and centripetal force and using the simplest of tools. It's all up to the glass blower what the form is. Anything is possible. And that's, after all, I think one of the things that makes glass blowing really fun. I mean, it's no different than a piece of paper and a pencil or a lump of clay, but in glass blowing, when you pick up the blowpipe, you're faced with just a huge variety of possibilities. And free blowing is certainly the most free of all of the processes of glass blowing. So there's a quick vessel. It took just about 3 minutes. Ta-da. I'll toss that. The other big category is mold blowing. And like I said before at the beginning, there are a number of types of molds, but they fall into one of two categories. There's the full-size blow mold, and that started around 10, 20, 30 AD. We have a show up right now at the museum of the work of Ennion, who is the best known of the early 1st century Roman mold blowers. In that case, as today, the bubble goes into a mold, and when it comes out, it's its final shape and size. It has all of its decoration in place. And we're going to show the use of a terracotta mold that will be for the stem of a goblet. Now we're just going to show the use of the mold. We're not going to make the whole goblet because I want to cover a lot of ground today. This is made of terracotta. It's thinly lined with soot, and that acts as a release agent. It was made by a fellow in England, about an hour west of London, near Stonehenge, a fellow named David Hill, who with his business partner, Mark Taylor, have a business they call the Georgian glassmakers now. They were for years known as the Roman glassmakers. And I think David who makes the molds, probably knows more about mold blowing from antiquity than anybody on the planet. So anyway, David very kindly made this mold for me. It's 2 parts, obviously, and it's difficult to see. In this position, it would be a lion mask stem for a Venetian goblet from maybe 1550 to about 1650. These were fashionable. So, Ben, I'm going to ask you to come up. This is Ben Dombey from New Orleans, who's come to help me. Ben's going to be the mold holder. And, well, let's put the block up. Ben's going to hold the mold, and I'm going to gather a little bit of glass, drop it in, and blow. I take a very small gather of glass. I blow the bubble. I want the tip somewhat thin. Blow again. And the top of the mold is really narrow. So I make a broad constriction so that this will drop down into the hole. I'll reheat and then come on over. Okay. And there it is. This would be ready to put on the morice on the bottom of the cup of a goblet, and then I'd add another morice and put the foot on and open the foot, punty it, and finish the rim. So that's a good example of a circa 1550, 1600, something like that, mold blown process. And that's full-sized mold blowing. Now, I think we all know about dip molds or optic molds. They're basically 2 types. There's the type with the ribs and the type with the prongs, usually called a pineapple mold. And we'll wait to see those. We've all seen that, I think, before, and I will get to that eventually. But I want to show you some slightly unusual molds. Probably after this, the most common mold is the mold you use to alter the opening of a vessel. And the most common one is the fin mold. Fin molds often have 6 sides. They might have 8 sides. Here's one with 10. You can make them in a huge variety of shapes. So I'm going to start with this one. Now, to make this demo a little bit faster and more interesting, I've pre-made a bunch of parts, and they're, excuse me, being kept at about 950 degrees Fahrenheit here. So I'm going to pick these up on a punty, and it'll save me the time of making a whole vessel. Later on, after we've gone through all these molds, I'll do some glass blowing, and you'll see the earlier part. But I thought it might be fun to just focus on these molds for a minute. I have just slid a punty with a little bit of glass on the end into the furnace. I'm going to get it slightly soft, and then I'll pick up the first cup. Class, any questions so far while we're waiting for the punty to get hot? Okay. Here we go. glass is an incredibly poor conductor of heat. It's going to take a while to get this from 950 Fahrenheit up to about 1100, maybe 1150 Fahrenheit, at which point it will become soft. Now, if I just leave it in the furnace, the surface will get really hot before the core, the thick part of the glass, gets hot. And suddenly, if I do that, suddenly, if the inner part gets soft, the thing will collapse under its own weight. So the safe way to get this really hot, really carefully, is to do these multiple reheats. I call this the heat treatment. And it's a way of getting everything soft without having it collapse. Now it's just about there. I'm going to pick up the fin mold. And I'll be doing it right there. Kind of a magical transformation. It's such a relief to the eye, too, to see something that isn't round. Now, I think a lot of people have used fin molds and seen that, but you may not know there's an interesting variation on that you can do with most any fin mold. When you come out of the fin mold, if the vessel that you're sticking the fin mold in is smaller than the mold, as you slide it in, the ribs freeze the glass. It stays a little thicker than the glass between. And very often, if it expands it a lot, there's a sort of a festoon between each rib. And you can exploit that by reheating right after you use it, and those thicker points have more mass. They're sticking out further, so they get hotter, and if you spin really fast, you get this really nice kind of arcade effect. So I'm going to use this mold for that. This could be the top of a goblet, something you see a lot in late 16th and 17th century Venetian glass, this kind of technique. This is just beginning to get slightly soft. That's just to stiffen up the base. And here we go. Not hot enough. There we go. As I said before, the tips are a little thicker, so I'm going to heat rather shallow so that the tips get extra hot. And I'm going to spin as I'm doing that. And so you get this nice little edge effect when you do that. I have backups in here in case something goes wrong. That can be a little bit more extreme, so I think I'm going to do that again, and I'll get it hotter so that there's more of a stretch and there's a little bit more pointing. Here we go. A very clever technique that I saw the great maestro Caramea, Carlo Tosi, back in 1982 use. He was making very, very thin octagonal vessels, very thin, and it would be real easy to crack the interior. So, as I mentioned before, glass is a really poor conductor of heat, so if you just stick it in the furnace, the exterior is going to get really hot. If you then go into a thin mold, the interior can be pretty chilly, and you can crack the inside. So how do you get the inner surface hot and soft, really soft, without having the vessel collapse? You can do what I got from him. I call it layering the heat. So what you do is you give it a serious reheat. I'm going to put my mold here so I'm ready for it. You give it a serious reheat, and if you just come out and wait, yes, the skin cools some, but if you do this, the skin cools really quickly. And if you do that 5 or 6 times, you wind up with sort of a sandwich of layers of cool, layers of hot, layers of cool, and eventually, and the cool layers keep the thing stiff, so it's not going to collapse. And eventually, the heat gets to the inside and the vessel is completely under control. It's very clever. I wish I thought of it. I'm going to touch the outside to just see just how soft this is. Yep, there we go. It's deceptive. The lower half is quite a bit thicker than the upper half, and of course it takes longer to heat. That's what happened last time. I didn't realize it was as chilly as it was. So I'm going to do a couple more layerings. You could hold it up in front of a fan just as well. That does the same thing. I'm going to pick up the mold. Oh God, Well, that didn't work well at all. So what happened was this was all softer than I thought. This froze more quickly than I thought. So that's what happens when thin molding goes bad. I wish I could say I'm glad that happened, but if it had worked better, there would have been more festoons at the top, and I could have spun faster, heated more, and it would have made more of this effect. All right, so that's it for fin molds. That's about everything I can think of that you can do with a fin mold. Now, the first time Lino Tagliapietra taught at the studio, it was the summer of 1996, and he asked Harry Seaman, the studio manager then and today, if he could make this mold for him. And I thought it was a really clever mold. I call it a drape mold. Not sure what they would call it in Italy. But again, I've pre-made a bowl, and I'll pick that up. And the bowl has straight sides. It's got nearly straight sides. They're slightly splayed. I'm going to pick up the bowl, get it hot, spin it open to the form of a plate, and while it's really soft, I'll drape it over here, and you'll see a very nice effect. While the punty's getting hot, any questions? Okay. After this, we're going to see the oddest mold of all. I'll let you have a glimpse of it. It's this thing. And from the 17th century, we have a bunch of goblets that have tops that are sort of quatrefoil. They look like this. There'd be obviously a stem and a foot. And so this is the device that we've come up with. David Hill, the mold maker, glass artist, made the inner part. And this was made by a colleague of mine, Kyle Larrabee. So we'll show you that in a minute. But first, the drape mold. You may occasionally hear applause coming from Hot Shop A on the other side. Johnny Toso is teaching a class right now on the other side. So that I don't hit the door when I come out when it's really soft, I'm going to remove this door. I try to keep it to one mistake a webcast. And I think I'll put the drape mold right here. Again, I'm going to soften this gradually, and I think I'll open it a little bit more with the jacks before I spin it out. And right here at the mouth of the furnace, I'll spin it open. There it goes. Keep it turning. And there's the drape. Now I'm going to break it off before it distorts any worse. Any questions? That's a really simple mold. If you look at 19th century American glass and early 20th century American glass, in lamps and vases and things like that, you'll often see a really complicated, jagged, crenellated edge. And those can be done with molds like this, but molds that have multiple parts that flip in so that when the glass goes on, they flip these parts down and it pushes the glass between. And you can get really sharp edges like that. And it's an outgrowth of this sort of thing. It's a later development of this sort of mold. We're going to move this 90 degrees so that, Ben, you want to practice that and show us what it's going to look like? I'm going to come over with the soft glass, and these help me align it. So I'm going to come over, lower it in, and Ben is going to slide this handle up, and it'll push the glass onto the mold. Now I got the idea for this from hot fingers. You know, those things that flame workers always use to hold vessels. This is basically just a giant hot fingers. And the mold is terracotta. It doesn't need a release because it doesn't really need a release agent because the glass is not that hot when it touches it. And it only touches it for just the briefest instant. Would you close it again and let's check alignment, because this automatically puts the mold in the right place. And here I come. Now as I've done before, I've pre-made the parts, so I'm going to pick it up out of the pickup oven. Ben, it's going to be a minute, so be comfortable. I'm going to straighten this up a teeny bit. Yeah. And the effect involves mostly the upper half of the bowl. That said, I'm going to try to get everything slightly soft. Now the edge is nice and soft. Ben, you want to stand by? There we go. Open wide, please, and close. I always sound like a dentist when I say that. There we go. Very interesting technique. Thanks, Ben. Any questions? We're going to go on to the dip mold now. All right, dip molds. The best term for this, the best generic term is dip mold. They're often called an optic mold. They're often called optic mold because they produce an optical effect. And what happens is this. When you blow a thick bubble in, come out and blow more and expand it, you wind up with thick ribs and a space between that's quite a bit thinner. And the thick rib is effectively a lens, so it's an optical effect. Same thing with the pineapple mold. Same thing. The prongs, when you blow, the prongs become thin areas and the spaces between them become thick areas. And the difference between thin glass and thick glass means a difference in the amount the light is bent as it passes through the object. The thicker the area, the more the light's bent. So it produces an optical effect. That said, if you use opaque glasses, like say solid black glass or solid white, you don't see through it and there's actually no optical effect because you're not looking through the glass. A small point, but the better term is a dip mold. Now that said, most every time I refer to them, I talk about optic molds. So we're going to start with the more common one, the ribbed one, and then we'll look at this. Now the fundamental difference between a dip mold and a full-size mold is that when you come out of this, there's no more inflating, no more changing of shape or size. That's it. When you come out of a dip mold, there's always more blowing and more shaping. The glass in my furnace is about 6 weeks old and it's really cordy, so I'm going to go gather out of the big furnace. The preparation for a bubble for using a dip mold is different from that when you're not using a dip mold. In this case, you want the bubble to go to the very bottom of the gather. So you blow a bubble into an oblate spheroid of solid glass and watch the bubble go charging out and blow the tip thin. Then I elongate it. It needs to be slightly tapered to fit all the way to the bottom of the mold. And again, I'll be using the rib mold. After I come out of the mold, the goal will be to reheat as little as possible because the reheats really damage the pattern. I blow hard, I spin to transform the shape to that of a cylinder. It comes out conical. You want it cylindrical. I grab the end, pull, twist, blow, yank, barely blow. I finish the neck, I make the neck, finish the neck, trim the tail. I heat the lower half, blow, the rubber blow hose is in place of an assistant on a little stool here blowing when I ask for air pressure. The bottom is getting hot. I'm going to flatten the bottom. I cool the punty site. And transfer to the punty. The blow, yank, blow method, the business of grabbing the end of the soft bubble and yanking it out and then blowing again, is a very quick way to make tall, narrow objects. I'll add a lip wrap to this, just a little highlight of color on the edge. Blow, yank, blow is a way of making tall, relatively narrow vessels. When I use the pineapple mold, I'll make something that's broad and short, a bowl. I do a lot of things standing so that I don't have to get up and down 1,000 times a day. I find it very comfortable. Flame workers do this all the time. Flame workers don't have a bench, and they're perfectly accustomed to doing these sort of things, seated or standing. The Soffietta, the second most important tool in the history of glass blowing, the blowpipe being the first. Going to make this perfectly cylindrical, open it a little bit more, and Soffietta, again, that'll make the final opening easier. I work as quickly as I can at the bench so that the reheats are as brief as possible. Again, the reheats really damage the ribs. And the goal is to have the ribs look the same from the bottom to the top. Go. And now the pineapple mold. If you think about it, just for a second, you might wonder, if you've never used one of these or seen it used, you might wonder how on earth do you get the bubble out? Because there are all these prongs, undercuts, creating undercuts. The way you do it is by, right after blowing really hard, you suck in a little bit, make the bubble a little smaller, withdraw it, and then it can be pulled upward and out. Watch. Again, I'll gather from the main furnace. Here it's essential that the bubble go right to the tip. If it's solid at the tip, the undercuts will get caught in the mold and you won't be able to get the bubble out. Now, if you would notice, the bubble goes right to the tip. I don't use the blow hose because I need to blow really hard to get the tails of the mold. That's a process I call blow, squish, blow. I pull in with the jacks to create, very quickly to create the oblate spheroid. I'll touch the sides, flatten the bottom. In the bowl I used for in the bowl I used and spun out for the drape mold, the edge was a folded edge. And I'd like to show you how I did that. First, I opened the hole to about 1 inch in diameter. Now I'll reheat the open end, the shoulder area, and use the puffer or soffietta. And this is a shaping tool. It's used to change the shape of the glass. It's not so much used to thin thin the glass. When the edge gets hot, I'll take the tips of the blades and gently push the rim in so that it folds under and it will touch the inside surface of the bowl. And there's the double thickness right there. Give that a nice flare. So that's the pineapple type dip mold. And last, I thought I'd show you two completely different ways to make one of these octagonal tumblers that I showed you earlier. I use the process called blow, yank, blow. And the first time I do it, I'll do this, what I call the standard setup, and I'll do it the normal way. I'll do it a second time. I won't make an entire tumbler, I'll just do the glass blowing part. The second time, I'll do it a much quicker, much more dynamic, and much more difficult way. The first will take, if I make the entire vessel, will take about 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes. This second way takes almost 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes off, and it can be as fast as under 5 minutes. So it's a really dynamic process. The only problem is it's really hard. So first, the easy way. As I marver, the glass gets pushed out beyond the blowpipe, but there's also force pushing the glass up in the hole in the blowpipe. So when I blow very gently at first, then I blow harder. And the gentle blow at first is to get the glass out of the hole. Then it blows out really evenly. I marver the tip. And this is the normal blow, yank, blow process. This is the process a Venetian would use, obviously not with the rubber blow hose, they'd have an assistant. This is the process a Venetian would use for making a tumbler, a small vase, the cup of a goblet. We make a little point. I like to begin the neck. This is optional. I pull a little, blow, yank, and blow. You leave a nice thick spot on the bottom for the punty to sit on. And then I reheat the outer half to elongate the vessel. And from here, I'd reheat the bottom and flatten the bottom. This is the alternative way, a lot trickier. The process is going to be basically the same, but rather than doing a standard setup, I'm going to gather the glass and with the blow hose on it, go right through the entire process from the gathering heat. There'll be no reheat involved. I do marver briefly. Put the blow hose on. And here goes. So it's almost ready to have the bottom flattened. Not quite. The lip wrap. very elegant process, very difficult, very fast. Are there any questions? Okay, well, this has been Ben. Okay, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. We saw a lot of different kind of molds. Perhaps the most unusual of them all, we call this the Larrivee 3000 for Kyle Larrivee, who helped me build it. And maybe the most pedestrian of them all, in a way, the Drape Mold. There's nothing simpler than that. And the dip molds and the full-size molds. So thanks a lot for watching the demo. Thank you a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks so much. See you next time.